Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to Vision Zero Cities Rapid Adaptation for the Bike Boom. This is one more of a fantastic series of panels we've had this week together with Transportation Alternatives and Vision Zero Cities Conference. And if you haven't had a chance to tune into previous sessions, they're archived and available for you. We are going to start out today with hearing from Damien Kevit from Families for Safe Streets. He's got a very powerful story for us to share, rooting us in our mission this week and always in terms of advocating for safety and safe streets. So, and then we'll go to our panelists and get a few introductions. So with that, I'll pass it off to Damien and take it away.
Hey, for here, it's good morning. I'm going to share my screen here because I've got a few slides as I introduce this. All right, well, it's an honor to be opening this next segment, Bike Boom. As you said, my name is Damien Kevit. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Streets Are For Everyone, and I'm a member of the SoCal chapter of Families for Safe Streets. Now, I shouldn't actually be talking to you here today, alive, and doing what I do, because on February 17th, 2013, I was cycling in Griffith Park with my wife, going to the Los Angeles Zoo for a picnic. And just a few hundred feet from our final destination, I was involved in a minor collision with an individual in a light-colored minivan. Because the individual that hit me didn't have the courage and common decency to stop and render aid, I was pinned under the car as he fled from the scene of the collision. I was dragged down the street and then down the on-ramp of the 5 freeway and continued to be dragged under his car. In total, I was dragged nearly a quarter of a mile until I was able to dislodge myself in traffic lanes of the freeway, while the person who hit me sped away, never to be caught or brought to justice. Now, I love cycling. And despite what happened to me, the day that I woke up from the first of many surgeries to find that my right leg had been amputated, I swore I would get back on the bicycle and finish the ride that I had started that fateful day. After 4 months in the hospital, I walked out, and the next week I got back on a bicycle, relearning how to ride. A few months later, I started a cycling event to raise awareness of the epidemic of hit and run crimes in Los Angeles. The event was aptly called Finish the Ride. In my first century ride, I did my first century ride, my first marathon after that. And more importantly, that first event, Finish the Ride, has continued and transformed into the organization Streets Are For Everyone, also known as SAFE. SAFE works with family members, advocates, and civic leaders from across Southern California to achieve the objectives of Vision Zero. Now, to say that my injuries were extensive is an understatement. To say that I experienced the worst nightmare you could possibly imagine is putting it nicely. To say that in only 2 minutes my life changed forever is as expected. But to say that I am proud of what myself and a dedicated team of other Families for Safe Street members and street safety advocates have done since then is the truth. The work that we are all doing to save lives and make our cities better and safer and healthier is not easy and is often not thanked, but it is making a difference. And if it makes any difference to you, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So don't stop and never give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. It's just an incredible story. It was so powerful to see and read some of that going into this. And I love that we're grounded in, we're talking to a few business leaders here and policy leaders, and we're grounded in safety with this whole conference. So with that, we're kind of going to go through some introductions. I'll start with a brief intro on myself, and then we'll go to each member of our panelists, and we'll kind of understand where we're at in terms of what we're doing with our different organizations. And then we'll kind of talk about that, leading from safety, leading from community education. What can we do to ensure that stories like yours, are not repeated? To start off with myself, my name is Peter Yuskauskas. I'm the head of marketing and retail for Brompton Bicycles North America. We make folding bicycles that are great for cities, and we're also focused on ensuring that our bicycles are approachable, accessible, easy to ride, that we build a community around them, and that we create an environment that people feel welcomed and ready to sort of approach whatever form of cycling that they might want to do, whether it's some distance or like commuting to work or picking up groceries, whatever they might need. But I'm really excited to get to our panelists. So let me switch over to Doogie. I'll give you the floor, and I'm going to pull up a few slides that Doogie has prepared and shared with me. So let me introduce Doogie Roux. Doogie Roux is a micromobility consultant, and he was formerly the operation manager for Houston B-Cycle, an incredible bike share program out of Houston, Texas. So share these wonderful photos of you, Doogie.
All right. Thank you. And again, just thank you to Damien for having the courage to tell his story. I'm definitely just grateful for your presence and your courage to, again, tell that story. Shifting over to my introduction, like you said, currently I'm a micromobility consultant, and I recently transitioned from working with Houston Bike Share, the operator of Houston B-Cycle, the city's bike share program. I was director of operations for about 6 years, and it was a good time there. And we did a lot to really just expand our system. And again, currently with my work, I'm just really working to create cohesive and connected infrastructure for everyone. And I became a bit of a micromobility nerd in recent years, and just being obsessed with getting around in the urban space. And that just really led to my current work. Next slide. So again, just continuing that work, most specifically with Bosch e-bike systems, I'm really just advocating for more use of e-bikes. I've experienced the world on a bicycle, and it's been amazing. But I think about those who may be hindered or handicapped, and I realize the benefits of it, and I just wanted to share that with more people. I'm also doing some work in the community with various developers and community managers. And I'm also on the board of directors for Bike Houston, our local advocacy organization. Again, just with safety as the #1 priority, that's a lot of work that we're doing in that regard. Next slide. Shifting back to Houston B-Cycle, I'm finding myself now just doing a lot of things I never said I would. I didn't think I'd be in advocacy, but that's a photo in the top left of our mayor. And I'm working with local officials and whatnot, just to, again, create safe, cohesive micromobility networks for everyone. And throughout our city, we just have a really diverse population. And we really want to be in touch with that diverse population so that they all can enjoy getting around the city. Next slide. And here's a quick look at our footprint for Houston Bike Share back in around, I think, 2015, around the time that I joined. We had extensive support from the city, the community, and we were able to expand greatly. And that was the bulk of my work, along with just building the team and whatnot. We went from 5 employees to 25, and from, I believe, about 30 stations to now about 115. Next slide. That's our 115 stations across Houston. You can see we have a core network in what we call the Loop. The 610 Loop is a freeway that encompasses kind of the core of the city. And we have a few outliers. Those outliers are some recreational communities centered around parks, and then also various developments on the outer edges of town. There's still some work to be done to build better connectivity and ensure that we serve all the neighborhoods in Houston. Another part of that work was just shifting the allocation of a certain grant that we had to, again, include all neighborhoods and not overlook anyone. And so that's the essence of what I'm doing. And thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Doogie. I thought it was so interesting speaking with you to understand like the various borders and red tape that you had to go through during the rapid expansion. You guys had received this huge grant for expansion right before COVID, and then it sort of became something that you had to take and run and sprint with in order to deliver over the course of the last several months. And then also through that, which we'll get to in a bit later, how you overcame some barriers in sort of the perception of bicycles, the perception of cycling, as you expanded into other communities that had never sort of had this type of infrastructure before. But before we go to that, I'm going to pull up Maximilian Gawlik's presentation. Maximilian was so interesting to talk to, coming to us as a Parisian perspective, but more than just Paris. In fact, it's the entire Paris region, as I learned. So Maximilian Gawlik is a landscape architect and urban planner of the Institute Paris region. And please forgive my horrible pronunciation of Paris. I'm now going to share your presentation here.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, cool. Here we go, and you can take it away.
So hello, everybody. So my name is Maximilian Gawlik. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner, and I work for the Paris Region Institute, which is one of the biggest urban planning agencies in Europe. We're about 200 urban planners, economists, environmentalists, experts on energy and climate, and so on. We're very closely working with the Council of the Paris region, but we also work with local authorities and also on international projects and studies. Today, I'm here to talk about bicycle policy and bike-related actuality in our region. And as I've been working on this lately a lot. So Paris region covers an area of 12,000 square kilometers and houses about 12.2 million people. And one of those local authorities which we have is Paris City, of course, which has 2.2 million inhabitants. And it's really important to understand this because the small territory of Paris City is really a real driver for a region in terms of bicycle policy. Next slide, please. So if you look at the number of 5,800 kilometers of bicycle infrastructure, which is around 3,600 miles, it might seem a lot, but as you can see on the next slide, despite some nice, continuous and well-designed bike paths, this is often the reality. We have different types of infrastructures. We have lack of signage. We have our bike paths are often in a bad shape, sometimes even dangerous, and they're not connected to a network. And so often the number of users is quite small. On the next slide, we can see, we go back to Paris City. And as I said, it's really a driver in our bicycle policy for our entire region. So the development in the city really started in the late 2000s. And then since 2015, Paris has started a new and very ambitious plan, which is today carried out by the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, who also wants to limit drastically the space of the cars in the city. And it's really promoting walking and cycling. So as you maybe know, she has been recently re-elected, and this absolutely confirms her strategy. And Paris is currently elaborating their new plan. So today in Paris City, only there are around 900 kilometers of cycling infrastructure. The numbers of users are constantly rising. Where in 2015 they fixed a goal of 15% of modal share of the entire transportation system in Paris. I think they're really close to this objective today, and they maybe have even more. And then on the next slide, we can see a new vision for Paris region also. So finally, we also have a strong vision for a region. And it's called the RERV project. So this stands for Réseau Express Régional Vélo. So it's a regional bicycle express network. And it's really interesting because it's a project that was initiated by associations, so non-profit organizations for biking advocacy. So it's really interesting. And it's been taken up by the regional council. And it's to be constructed by the local authorities with a fund of 300 million euros from the regional council. And it's a plan for 650 kilometers of continuous itineraries. And it's designed really for big traffic. So the bicycle is finally seen as a mass transit mode. So this is a real change for us. So on the next slide, I would say that after all, everything got accelerated this year. firstly with the big strikes of the public transportation sector in winter, and then of course because of the health crisis. And today cycling is really considered as a safe mode of transport, an alternative for public transportation. And as you can see on the photos in Paris today, there's a strong political will from the mayor of Paris. And for example, she inaugurated 50 kilometers of temporary bike lanes and some really emblematic places like the Rue de Rivoli, which is on the upper picture, with around 20,000 bicycles on some days, which has never been seen in our region before. And generally also on small streets, you see more and more users. And last slide, it's not only concerning, so this change, this boom is not only concerning Paris city, but also the region. Even today, we can already see a change. So we had 140 kilometers of new bike lanes within the region within 4 months only. And we have been solving some major problems which have not been solved for many years, and all of a sudden with the crisis we were able to solve them. And we also see a lot of new users, and the bike traffic has been doubling in the region, in the Paris region, compared to 2019. And I'm happy to discuss with you in a couple of minutes.
It's really amazing, and another great international perspective. I mean, we'll come on to Georgia in a moment, but I think, you know, as we talked, Maximilian and I was thinking 2.2 million people in Paris versus over 12 million in Paris region, and cycling in urban planning and the need for improvements in cycling infrastructure, they extend well beyond the sort of the borders of our urban centers. And I just think it's amazing to be in the position of thought leaders or people working in these influential markets, and how we can take those learnings and expand outside, but also with 1,200 local authorities you mentioned to deal with all the different red tape. I think both Doogie and Georgia will have a lot to commiserate with you on in terms of navigating that. So with that, let's head over to Georgia Yexley, who is head of growth at Beryl, which is a UK-based bike share company, as well as the producer of some of the coolest cycling accessories I've ever seen. So I'll pass over to you, Georgia.
What an introduction. Thank you so much. And just to echo my peers here as well, just to give thanks to Damien for sharing that story. It's incredible how you turned such a horrifying experience into such an inspirational action. So thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for what you do. So yeah, I think it definitely has kind of grounded us in the focus of this what would you call it, this interaction that we're having now is a lot about safety, but also with the view of how the bike boom has impacted our lives, and the opportunity that there is now to take a different stance on how we take cycling in the city forward. So I do have some slides, but I'm not sure if they did make it over in time to be shared.
Oh, let me take a look now. Hold on. Sorry about that.
No worries. There we go. There we are.
Lovely.
So they're not as exciting as anyone else's slides, I have to say. They're really just an introduction to Beryl and what we do, what our ethos is. To introduce myself a little bit better, I've been working in the bike share micromobility world for a bit over 3 years now internationally. I joined Beryl about 1.5 years ago, just at the cusp of when we started getting into the bike sharing operator world. So that was our first service in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And what you can see here is the service as it is today. So we've got bikes, e-bikes and e-scooters all operating within the same service, the same platform. But we're also integrating this kind of on-street infrastructure as well. So you'll see them all sitting there in one of our parklets. So we're thinking a lot about how the full system actually benefits the wider community as well, with things like parklets, planters and other things that we can build into infrastructure that are supporting a wider network of cyclists. And you can see in the bottom left there is a marker saying B Corp. Lots of people aren't familiar with that term, but Beryl is the only micromobility B Corp. It's a classification of a business that basically places social responsibility, impact, sustainability on the same vein as profitability. We think all of those are integral to having a really sustainable service, long-term service for a city. And I think I can see a little note that somebody's noticed that it says Staten Island. It says that because we are launching our service on Staten Island in spring of next year. It would have been this year. We were devastated that we couldn't make it happen. Obviously, things outside of our control have meant that we've had to push that back into next year. It's in partnership with New York DOT, and it should be going live in spring of next year. So this deck is really about that. So if we can go to the next slide. So Peter did give a little bit of a giveaway on our heritage. So we are a bike share operator. We have been operating services across the UK for the last year and a half. The first being in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. We now operate 5 and are of course going to be going into Staten Island. We've recently announced another one here in the UK. We've got quite a number of cities that are going to be announced over the course of the next few months, weeks even. So we're growing at quite a rapid speed, but that's coming from that 2019 point. We actually have a 6-year history before that started with the creation of the laser light. So the laser light is very much a safety focused product, and that has been embedded within the kind of ethos of us as a brand from day one. Our founder, Emily Brooke, she created the laser light to solve the problem of that kind of blind spot visibility that is often the cause of many collisions for cyclists. So it projects a laser image of a cyclist, basically about 2 meters ahead of the person on the bike. You can have it on your personal bike. We still sell them. And hopefully helps that we did some research with the Transport for London here and found that increased visibility of cyclists. I think it was by about 38% in that blind spot. So we were really successful with that product, and then continued to build the company from there. We integrated that laser light into systems like the London bike share system, the New York City bikes it was integrated with for some time, also in Montreal. And through that, created that understanding of how bike share services operated, create those relationships with local authorities, and then brought in a really exceptional team from across the board and across the industry to build out our offer, which operates slightly differently to your kind of traditional free floating service. If we go to the next slide, actually, you can see how the laser light looks. So this is on the London bike share scheme. So it just kind of projects that laser light for further visibility. And that is still a really important part of our business. It's integrated into our system as well. So that's also on our bikes and our will be on our scooters. So that's just a little bit of our heritage. If we go on to the next slide, this is a really integral part of what differentiates the Beryl hybrid system from your free floating service, where you have complete flexibility to park wherever. The Beryl system is bay based. We use geofencing technology and encourage all of our riders to park in bays. We find about 98% compliance in most cases of people parking in the bay. So it obviously helps with keeping our equity of the streets and making sure that it's staying tidy. It helps with the sustainability of our service. You do still have the flexibility to park out of bay, but you have a convenience fee. I know it says 88 there, but that's actually old data. It's now 98%. So I should have corrected that before coming on. If we go to the next slide, so the next slide is how things are starting to come together for Staten Island. So you can see that it's first focusing on the North Shore part of the rock. I can definitely echo what Doogie said about wanting to, have that expansion across the island and having to do things slowly and cautiously. We actually tend to take this approach with most of our city services. We're always looking to deliver citywide, but we would tend to have a smaller service area to begin with and start to understand how people are using the service, gather that information. Importantly, we track the vehicles, not phones or people's data. We track the vehicles, understand how they're moving around, understand how the service is working, make sure that we have that density of bays. So actually what you're seeing here is a map out of some of the bays that we're looking at implementing rather than bikes. This is bay stations where you could pick up or drop off. So we find having that density of bays is really integral to being able to make sure that people can find a place to park, that they're not going to get the convenience fee, that they have that understanding. And we're developing really strong ridership behavior with the service that we're delivering. So this is the kind of phase one of the rollout on Staten Island, and then we'll be looking to slowly actually bring that the full way across the conurbation. And we do have a request a bay form. So if you are living on Staten Island or working there or visiting frequently, you can definitely recommend places to us as well. The next slide, actually, I can't remember what's on the next slide. Oh, I'm on the next slide. So I do have a picture of myself on this deck, which is great. That's me riding one of our e-bikes. So yeah, these are the two vehicles that we're going to be bringing to Staten Island, the bike and the e-bike. A few bits of information about how they operate. I won't go on too long about the tech, but just a few details there if you're interested. Always willing to spend more time going on about the bikes themselves and the technology that we use. We're definitely a kind of technology-led company. And that's it. I think the final slide is just a nice picture of one of the parklets that I love the most, which is currently in our service area in Norwich in the UK. So this is with our bikes, our e-bikes and our e-scooters, all part of the same service, serving different journeys, different users, different rides, and all kind of placed outside this beautiful coffee shop that we love and are really good friends with, and we know that's bringing foot traffic and supporting the local economy. So this is like the epitome of what we want to see with the type of service that we're bringing into our communities and where we think it's driving the most value for the community more widely. So yeah, that is my intro. Really great to be here, and thanks for the invite.
It's another incredible personality to have met, another really interesting story. So like there's a lot to dive in there also from the international perspective, multimodal with bikes and scooters and different people that's accessing. And what I'd like to do is go right into one of our first questions around, bicycling filling unique gaps in the transportation system in the past several months. People who hadn't been riding before are trying to find ways of getting out of subways, ways of getting out of crowded public spaces. And I think, one of the interesting things about having two bike share companies in the brand is, we know, and Georgia mentioned to me that cyclists, people who are coming to bike shares are then turning to riding a bike and owning a bike later down the road. There's an interesting percentage conversion there. So I'm curious about that, but maybe we can each sort of talk for a moment about how the bicycle is addressing those gaps. And I'll start with a very short anecdote from Brompton. We have a retail store in New York, and we've had it for 3 years, and we've been quite successful over the last couple of years. But this spring, obviously everyone's turning to bikes, and the number one thing we heard at the store was no longer like, I need to ride a bike because I want to commute and I have all these goals. It became, safety oriented, and people wanted to get out of the subway. They wanted to get away from, the potential to contract COVID, and they were turning to bicycles, even if they had never been riding a bike in the city before. And there were some really interesting things around safety, like a New York Times article saying the reason why so many people are turning to cycling is because they view this opportunity to try riding a bike, whether it's a share bike or one they purchase, because there's no cars on the road, because they have this opportunity to try it, which is a little bit lower pressure. So I wonder, maybe starting with you, Doogie, and saying like, what does the ridership change look like? How are you seeing people adapting to cycling in Houston, and what kind of observations have you made through B-Cycle or your advocacy?
So for us, right away, the data was very apparent, and we saw, triple and almost quadruple numbers as far as ridership. And, it was a lot to keep up with. Early on, we actually had to close, I think, our 12 busiest stations just to accommodate social distancing and also mitigate some crowding in busy areas, especially parks. But, once we better understood the situation, we would reopen those and just really accommodate people better throughout the increased ridership. But again, the numbers were just substantial. And so we had to really beef things up as far as operations to keep up, and also just communicate, again, that safety aspect not just with, other cyclists and motorists on the road and whatnot, but also with mitigating the spread of COVID-19.
And Georgia, have you seen a similar kind of like demographic change? I know you're not tracking personal data, but are you able to sort of see any of that in Beryl's information or what Beryl's gathering?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I would definitely say in terms of the integration with the broader transport network, there's a lot of anecdotes and initiatives and evidence that we've had over the last few months of how important cycling is in the kind of recovery process. I mean, even recently we've been running initiatives with our local authority partners, and that's a really important point as well. I think in the way that we implement these services, that it's always in really close connection and relationship with the city itself, and understanding that it's a piece of the puzzle of how people are getting around, and may not serve every journey, but should be part of that kind of connection. So we've done some initiatives recently just around as people were then being instructed to go back to the office and go back to work, but as you said, had that fear of getting onto public transportation, but also wanting to reduce down the amount of private car usage, because there's clearly strong evidence between the increase in PM 2.5 and increase in COVID cases and all kinds of reasoning that we need to get people out of those private cars as well. So we've been running initiatives with the local councils to offer free use of the bikes during rush hour periods. So in Norwich, where we have the bikes, e-bikes and scooters, you can use the bikes and e-bikes for free between 7:30 a.m. and 9 p.m. and 3 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. during like the school rush and when there's the most stress on public transport. And that's in really, really close connection with the bus operators and the tube operators. So we're seeing that kind of connection and collaboration starting to happen at a much bigger scale, which is great. But I would also say that as much as people are flocking to bikes for for safety, getting to and from work and their commutes and all of that, actually, we've been quite surprised in some of the user research we've done recently that a lot of our users, we were seeing a huge amount of commutes, but because people are working from home, and I'm working from home, I think each of you are working from home, and I'm sure many people on the call are doing that now, we're actually seeing a huge surge in leisure riders and people riding for health and well-being and mental health and well-being. And even through some of the initiatives that we're doing, a lot of the people that are making use of them have been from that standpoint of health and well-being. So it's also that element of things in the situation that we find ourselves in with this pandemic and the need to get outside and exercise and enjoy the outside world, but in a safe and socially distant way, is also served by the bike. So that's a pretty interesting shift that we've seen in our research. And you also did mention the stat that we talked about before, so I will share that. One of the things, we did some user research recently to just kind of understand what our user base looks like and how they're working at the minute, who we're serving, who we're not serving. But one piece of information that we found that was really interesting was that for the users that were active during the pandemic, 6% of them had, at the time we surveyed, had already purchased a bike since using Beryl. So since using a bike share system, they had then made the decision to go on and make a purchase. But there were 37% that were considering making a purchase of a bike since using the service. So there's a really clear pathway there of, having that initial easy access and then going on and continuing that journey to become maybe more of a regular cyclist. And then we had 39% of our riders already had purchased a bike either prior to or after. So actually knowing that there's often the argument of, I've got my own bike, I don't need to use bike share. I also have my own bike, but I use bike share all the time, all different kinds. So seeing that we're also serving the kind of private bike owners as well through this service.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I'm glad you could give me the numbers because I couldn't hold them in my head. But that's always really interesting. It's really a journey, right? It's from people who they've stopped considering riding a bike as a form of getting around. Then they've had this realization, oh, there's this reason, there's this motivation to do it, and no matter whether they get on a bike share or on an electric scooter or on a Brompton or any other bicycle, they're going to find how enjoyable it is. And I think that's one of the really powerful things about getting this generation that is like a cycling sort of an adult age that needs to move around. They're required to move around to live. They're going to move forward. And later I want to talk about how this is a bike boom for a certain age group and up, and how we can, encourage the same thing to happen, not just out of necessity, but, to continue that through youth programs. And I know Doogie was really, really passionate about that. Maximilian, I wanted to shift over to you to talk about this difference between 12.5 million in Paris region versus 2 million in Paris, and thinking about these different needs for transportation or leisure. How are different types of urban density dealing with these different problems, and how are they conceiving of it, and how are you guys helping them work through those challenges of understanding what the best practice might be?
Interesting question. And I first wanted to say that there are lots of similarities with which we could observe in Paris region with what Georgia is saying about safety, about new users and new patterns also that could be observed. But first, so in Paris region, the numbers of people using public transportation system or the public transportation sector fell by 85% during the crisis. So it was quite poor, the outcome afterwards. And at the same time, the bike has gained a lot of public attention since it's a solution that can help avoid overcrowding in this public transportation system, while still being a very efficient mode of transport for short distance journeys. And this is very interesting because in our region, despite the fact that it's a large region, 2/3 of our trips are done for a distance under 3 kilometers. So they're really short distance trips, actually. That means that many people really live close by their workplace. And so we have, of course, there's lots of commuting still taking place, and this is a different reflection. So this is where the regional structure maybe comes in, but also we have to look at really the local scale. And since the bike is a really good alternative to motorized traffic in the city, along with walking also, we don't have to forget that in Paris, walking is still the number one of the modes. And so the public authorities in France understood quickly that there's a real potential in dense urban areas to develop this, and also in peri-urban areas, so suburban areas, because still 3 kilometers on general bikes, it's on a normal bike that's absolutely doable. And even more if you have an electric bike, then you can even go further without a problem. So the French authorities have been promoting the bikes as a safe mode of transportation publicly. And at the same time, we have to think about the space that a car needs and that a bike doesn't need. And if we would reduce the number of cars in the city, and all that space could be given to other purposes, we would have a lot more of greenery in the city, lots more space for sports, for play, and for other outdoor activities, also for dining and everything like this. And after all, coming back to the question of resilience and to the question of adapting to a health crisis, we have to remember that a bike is an active mode, which is really linked to the physical activity. Thus, for health, it's really important, and also it's affordable, and it's also reducing CO2 emissions, and it helps to reduce the carbon footprint of a city. And so it's not adding to air pollution, unlike cars. And after all, we're opting for a healthier, cleaner, and more active city. So I think we're going in the right direction there.
That's fantastic to hear. And I think, you guys are kind of leading the way globally when we compare, say, like London to New York to Paris. I think, Paris and Paris region certainly has made some of the biggest moves in support of cycling as a mode of transit. New York has a long way to go. And speaking of, just what people choose to do and the safety and the presence of cars, we've got 40,000 new vehicles registered this year. We've got something like 11,000 miles of streets that are given over to cars. What could we do with that space? Probably a whole lot. I wanted to move over to Doogie and sort of take this angle of expansion of the network, but also looking at who the network is serving and thinking about these planning and sort of best practice recommendations, and how, depending on how they're approached, they can be more or less successful in engaging that community. Could you talk to us about like some of your experience expanding B-Cycle and, you know, like the good ways to go about it versus some of the challenges that you had?
Sure. For me, you know, I really hold this perspective of, you know, marketing is very different from outreach. And I feel that, you know, all of us could definitely do more outreach, especially when it comes to expanding infrastructure. In Houston, especially, you know, our city's changing in a lot of ways. We wanted to keep up the infrastructure changes and whatnot for micromobility with all this development, but it's a really big task. But when we, with Houston Bike Share, Houston B-Cycle would expand, we never wanted to be perceived as bringing about bike share on the forefront of gentrification, especially in obviously the underserved, marginalized, and minority neighborhoods. So in the efforts of not doing or being perceived that we're doing so, we wanted to ensure that we were in touch with the community, their leaders, and we got their input so that they could understand that what we're doing is for them and that they could be active and engaged and involved and be a part of it.
And so, and we're talking about actually showing up and speaking to, say, you know, a church leader or a community leader, or getting and bringing them into the process, not just saying, here's our best practice, you know, we think you should do this, or, hey, we're coming next month, but you're saying, let's sit down and talk and go over this together. And what's the difference that you get in community reaction by doing that?
Yeah, the difference is very clear. You know, we get more of a sense of ownership from the community. A very special case we had in the past was we were experiencing some extensive vandalism in certain areas. And when I saw that issue, I thought, you know, what brought that about? What was the chain of events? And when I look back at the process in which we implement the station and the stations in that area, we didn't do a good job of engaging with the community and doing outreach. So there wasn't a sense of ownership. We took some time to revisit that and take those actions of meeting them on the turf and understanding, you know, where they were coming from and what, you know, their needs were and how we could meet them. Over time, we definitely saw a shift, and there was little to no vandalism in that area because, you know, we built rapport with that diverse group from our team and made the connections, and there was, again, a sense of ownership and, you know, willingness to maintain that system from a sense of or perspective of a good steward or a good citizen.
Yeah, and I think that's a really instructive approach and a great message from me, coming from marketing from Brompton, marketing versus outreach, and some of the things that we're like looking to do with transportation alternatives here. So that was really nice to hear from you. One question we had dropped through, I think, is really quite relevant, and maybe just sticking with you for one more moment. Georgia also touched on it in terms of Beryl with offering free access during certain times. This is a bit of a different question. It's what are the payment options to use with bike share? And I think that that's not only an interesting one in terms of like, how do you access a single program, but also how do you look at conceiving of a connected transit network so that my Metro card, for example, could do this, that, and the other thing, instead of, like, I've been in San Francisco and had to use 7 different apps to get around. But anyway, payment options with bike share, you guys have done a really interesting thing with B-Cycle, and I think I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, and I agree. You know, if there was a one card fits all, that'd be perfect. I think the only city that has been able to master that is LA, and maybe Austin has recently done it. But for us, you know, we have the kiosk where you can walk up and utilize a credit or debit card. We also have the membership fob or membership card that you can go and touch on a station and easily get a doc. But we had to think, you know, what about those users who aren't able to utilize a credit card or debit card, or who may be more of a cash-based user? What we did was, through our partnerships with the community and other stakeholders, we took the approach of, you know, bill pay, for example, where you go to a location, you provide the cash, they pay a bill or render a service like that. We did the same for access to our system. we got it to where a user could provide cash and, you know, a form of ID. If they were in that position and they were, you know, low income, they could have access to our system by purchasing what we call the Go Pass. And it was a bit of a, you know, on the honor system, but those users could have access to our system, unlimited access for $5 a month. And that's how we alleviated that issue.
And did you find that you had I mean, I know in New York, for example, there's lots of stories of those neighborhoods that are the marginalized, disadvantaged neighborhoods. A higher proportion of those people are actually the essential or key workers coming into the city. So did you see a higher utilization from that type of, those neighborhoods during COVID?
Definitely. And, you know, the data was there. A lot of those stations, they saw increased ridership, not only on the, I guess, the central trip aspect, but also for recreation, because, you know, Houston's a very large, expansive city. A lot of people do own bikes, but surprisingly still, a lot of them don't. And a lot of them in those communities, they had access to those bikes. And even though, you know, things slowed down in so many regards during these unprecedented times, we did still take steps to continue expanding. We even got bikes from cities that unfortunately had shut down their recycle program to keep up with the demand. We also got station equipment from Denver, because again, you know, we had a plan to do this early on, but in the unprecedented times, you know, the demand was just so great that we had to follow through to meet those needs, especially in our underserved communities. And we had local leadership, council members, commissioners, they stepped up to fund and support those efforts to get the infrastructure and the resources to those underserved communities.
That's, I mean, it's amazing. I just find what you guys doing are really, really cool. And I think also you're coming at it from a very interesting angle, being in a little bit of a less, I mean, I don't know, New York seems like it's got a million different hoops to jump through. Someone just mentioned, you know, all the different agencies and entities managing transit. I mean, I'm sure you guys dealt with the same. On that point, I'm curious to go to Maximilian and kind of coming back to this idea of like, with 1,200 different local agencies to work with, how do you streamline the process of pushing through these sort of transportation improvements? And how do you, how do you get your city to change? And then what are the particular things that you've been able to accomplish in Paris and Paris region on this kind of expedited timeline?
On the on new infrastructures or on new services?
So for example, it's a little bit two parts. It's like, what new things have been fast-tracked and installed in the Paris and Paris region? And how have you overcome the difficulties of implementing those things across 1,200 different local authorities that you have to work with in the Paris region area?
Oh, that's a difficult question, because it's not always been coordinated, of course. So as I said earlier in my presentation, Paris has been a real driver. So it was one of the first cities to announce the temporary bike lanes. And so this really helped. You just mentioned essential workers, and I think it's really interesting because Paris did something really interesting. In the beginning, we were thinking about, or local authorities were thinking about designing bike lanes only for essential workers, for example, to access to hospitals. And then Paris did something really interesting, and they changed their approach. They said, no, actually, we can't just tell people use this road to go to the hospital. And instead they shifted their approach, and they rather relied on the public transportation system, and they doubled the lines of the most frequented metro lines. And this was really a reflection that has a great impact on also on other territories in our region. So other municipalities also thought about maybe we should rather think of our existing infrastructure of public transportation and double these lines and connect. So really rely on this infrastructure or this regional structure that we already have. So they then started to do more and more new temporary bike lanes. And it's really interesting because we saw new connections between municipalities that have never been done before. And so there was actually much exchange between the different municipalities. So usually when municipality does its plan for, or we also have this inter-municipal structures, and they do their plan, their biking plan, for example, only for their territory. Of course, they also look a little bit what's going on in the other territories, but often it's not that well structured. And in this specific case of the temporary bike lanes, it was really interesting because they finally talked to each other, and we had great examples of exchanges between municipalities, and I think this is something that will stay. So we kind of, since there was this crisis, we kind of started this discussion, and I think it will continue. And there's this dynamic now, so that's great. Another thing is about the services, and on a regional scale, I think there's a lot of things that are still to do, and lots of coordination that's not possible yet. So I think in this case we have to advance a lot, because there's been announcements of big funds for people who wanted to buy bikes, for example, or who wanted to access to electric bikes, for example. Also, for example, there's these high quality bikes that you're able to rent from the region, from the regional council, and there's subsidies for reparation of bicycles. There's financial supports for people who want to buy new bikes, and so we have all these different kinds of supports for from different actors, also from the French state, from the region, from all kind of different players. But one problem remains is, how do people access these kind of services? People who don't have who don't have internet, who don't have access to this information. And so I think still many things still need to be done.
Work's never done, right? Georgia, I wanted to move over to you for a moment. I mean, we're talking about access. We're talking about, where do we have networks? We're talking about different types of transit people have access to. And one of the things that I think is a really important part of all of this is, how do we sustain that momentum going forward? And, a big portion of this too is on the approachability and the equity and in that accessibility. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about, anything Beryl has been doing, to empower groups that are maybe less likely to bike, and, women, minorities that are typical, so women with safety has been a big stopping point. I think the #1 statistical blocker that's cited for women is safety, but really, truly, it's for everyone, isn't it? I think it doesn't need to be pigeonholed there. But tell me, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think really, I've been making notes as well through this, because there's lots to learn. And I definitely keen to pick more of Doogie's brain on some of the initiatives that you've worked on to create some access around the kind of kiosks and cash pays. That's super interesting. And it's certainly an area that is like a big focus of how we're going to make sure that the services that we're bringing in are capturing as many people as possible. I think the important thing for us is making sure that that's built into your approach from the very beginning. So that's coming all the way through your product development. It's coming through the positioning of the brand. It's coming through who you make visible on your social media. Like, it should be coming throughout every single aspect of the business from day one. And that's why I kind of started with that B Corp mentality. So even when it comes to the kind of Beryl pricing model, it's been developed in such a way that you retain the value of your minutes. And we've seen there's been like a lot of research done around that's even just in having a specific type of pricing model, you're opening up your service to a wider network of users. On that user research we did recently, we did find that we are actually skewing with our user base overall, we're skewing more towards women through the pandemic, which has been really amazing to find. We're super happy about this. But I think both in terms of making it sustainable and making sure that it's possible to really integrate these types of systems in a way that they're accessible across multiple communities and identities, And I think Doogie's touched on this and Maximilian's touched on this, but I'm just going to come out and say it. I think from a government level and from a city level, they need to put the money on the table. They need to fund these types of programs and not simply just put the onus on businesses who need to be financially sustainable to subsidize and to figure out ways to make this work. They need to fund it. So we have worked with some incredible partners, and with a lot of the initiatives that we've done, we have been able to seek sponsorship or support with the city, but a lot of times we haven't. Most of the time we're self-funding. Most of the time we're dropping prices and just trying to find ways to create that access through those ways. But that's not going to be financially sustainable if you want a service that's going to continue to serve the wider population. And with that, you need to have the awareness from a government level, a city level. If we want people to have access to sustainable transport, to improve the way that people are moving in our cities, the city and the government level has to be bought into that vision as well. And they need to start funding some of these programs, and to support the businesses that are enabling it. And seeing that the businesses that are enabling it aren't necessarily going after grant funding just to pay their salaries, but actually to be able to develop the service and build the service and make it really add value for the city. So there's a change in perspective somewhat that I think needs to happen and has been happening. It might have required a pandemic, but it has been causing that shift in perspective of why sustainable transport is important and what these types of systems are there for, what they do, who they serve. So definitely I would say, we can have, as operators, as businesses, we can have all the best intention, we can build equity programs in, we can build funds for community, we can think about our pricing models. But if we don't have that level of support, and that is coming, so I'm not bashing anyone at all, but if you don't have that level of support from the government and city level, ultimately you can't have that balance of being financially sustainable, having the longevity and serving everyone in the community. You have to have that partnership and collaboration. So I think that's also why I started with saying I'm going to definitely be picking Doogie's brains as well, because as an industry, we also have to have that collaboration, sharing of best practice, taking what has worked and implementing it, and really understanding that that's how we're all going to be successful in this space, is if we do share that best practice and we see success across multiple services across the globe. For us, I mean, some things that have changed recently just off the back of the pandemic, with previously the law didn't allow for e-scooters to be on street at all whatsoever in the UK. And that legislation is slightly changed in that we have been able to go through a process to work with the Department for Transport here to run a trial for e-scooters. So it's a lot more controlled. There's a slow burn. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of tentativity, a lot of it coming from really reasonable places. But the pandemic has caused that shift of, okay, we have to understand that we have to look at this potentially really impactful way for people to travel and serving different types of trips. And even if we have to do that in a controlled way, in a slower way, we need all of the operators who are part of that trial to be sharing best practice, to be doing the best that we can to make sure that it is safe, that it does have longevity, and that we will be able to continue to build on these trials into something long-term sustainable, as you've said.
May I add something to this point? I think it's really interesting what you're saying, and I think that it's really important that there is the support for the users and for the kind of approaches that you're saying. But I think at the first place it's always important to understand where to put the money also, and I think it's really important to observe firstly who is biking on a territory, and then also questioning why are they using the bicycle infrastructure, or why are they biking there and not other users? Where are the other users? And I think we need to focus on what the users need really. So we're talking about access to bikes, about information, about support in their neighborhood, about infrastructure that needs to connect, the possibility to go by bike on different kind of trips. So it's for leisure, but it's also for really work, homework, so commuting. And then it has to be, there's a major aspect, it's really safety. And the city of Paris has been observing an increase in female bicycle infrastructure users of 10% within the last year. And so it's a great change. And so we're now at 40%. And in order to serve everybody, I think it's really necessary to adapt services to the needs of every kind of user. And it's a whole new structure that we have to think of. And in order to make biking really attractive for everybody, and not only for the white Caucasian middle class man, I think it's really important to really think of the different needs of the populations. And communication and accompanying neighborhoods is really important. And I think that community work and advocacy really in the neighborhoods is crucial. And this is already taking place. And it's amazing to see some of these experiences.
I think you're spot on, Maximilian. I think, in fact, that's kind of exactly why I raised that scooter trial in particular, because it's quite interesting how that's being operated, that you do have multiple micromobility operators that are part of the trial, but it's all in conjunction with the governing body, the Department of Transport. And the whole purpose of running it like a trial is to understand and to really be monitoring that very, very closely. And with a real level of control, so that it does have safety as the kind of paramount focus, but then all of the data that each of those operators is capturing, usage data, what infrastructure people are using, is then being fed back into a shared pool of understanding of how these vehicles fit into a wider mobility mix. So it's a really interesting case study for how you can kind of action and monitor side by side.
I mean, I think from my experience, I used to work in a bike shop on the Upper East Side, and we would sell electric bikes and folding bikes and kick scooters. And then we started selling electric scooters, and it was like, oh my God, this is like a totally different person who's coming in to buy an electric scooter versus a bicycle. They just see that as a viable transportation option. And I think there's a couple things that go to that. It's small, it's easy to carry with you. I remember I had one and I would zip down to the village in like 20 minutes and then fold it up and take it inside. And I mean, you can do that with a Brompton, but you have to pedal, and not everyone wants to. So we have electric bikes, and Brompton Electric is a great solution too. But still, there's a form factor size, and there's an approachability thing about standing and pressing a throttle. Doogie, in your experience with micromobility, how do you see those different demographic types? Who's riding scooters versus bicycles versus e-bikes?
I think, and it ties into the question earlier, the demographics, especially in Houston, are dynamic for a lot of reasons, but also we don't have those other micromobility options extensively yet. A lot of scooter operators aren't necessarily allowed in Houston at this time, but there are a lot of micro entrepreneurs that have come about and provided scooters to the public for rental and use. And then also there's a lot of individuals who have them personally. So what we see as far as the demographics and the data there, it's pretty much representative of what we've also seen with the bike share program, and being reflective of Houston and its diversity. And I think that just ties into keeping this bike boom going. And I'll add that, from leadership to management and, frontline and on the ground workers, we just need to ensure that, it's all diverse and inclusive. But as I said earlier, again, marketing is not outreach, and we have to make sure that we continue not just getting data, but that we also continue engagement, genuine and authentic engagement consistently. And, again, those demographics and whatnot that you see from use, you'll definitely notice that if there's a reflection in leadership, management, and the frontline work, that there's more diverse demographics as far as ridership and utilization.
And I think when you talk about some of the stuff Georgia said about taking that onus off of the corporation, off of the commercial interest in this, and putting it on the government side, I think one of the biggest aspects of all of this is ensuring that people understand how to ride safely, how to navigate safely, what to do if there's a problem, and whether it's a shared bike or your own bike or a scooter, where can you go, what can you do? And I think that type of engagement from a municipal level has to be there. And the same way that they're thinking about installing bike lanes, they need to be introducing cycling and the idea of cycling in this really approachable way. But like, cause I personally will try to fund some bike classes next year through like partners that do this in New York, but my impact will be so small versus what we could do potentially as an industry, or even more broadly as like a government effort to sort of get people to understand how to approach it safely.
Yeah. And oh, go ahead.
I was just saying I'm excited because I'd love to weigh in on this, because it's definitely an area of focus for us in terms of like that hands-on. And I couldn't agree more with what you've been saying, Doogie, about really needing to actually do the outreach work and differentiating that from marketing and what marketing is. I think, yeah, this idea of having the ability to do the more hands-on, like led rides, trainings, actually like having boots on the ground and going and supporting those kind of community groups, that's a huge part of how we like to operate. It's obviously been made really difficult in the last few months, so we've been having to be more creative about how we engage people, even in, like, for example, on Staten Island. I know we're talking about, you talked as well about the bay, the station placement and things like that. For us, it's just been even, in fact, we do this every time, but sending out letters to all of the people nearby to one of our bays, like, we're planning a bay here, what do you think about it? Doing that kind of consultation process, showing up at the community boards, all of that work. But the training side of things is really interesting to talk about, and an area that I'm keen to learn about, particularly in the US, because over here there is some investment in cycle training programs. Every council in the UK, you can go onto their website and find a free training course, but people don't utilize them because if you don't know how to ride a bike yet, or you're just getting back into it, you don't want to go and sign up to a public course in a park to go and potentially, fall flat on your face, or you don't know about it because they're not marketing them, which is like, or they're not doing any of the work to really put it out there and let people know these services are there. So a lot of what we do is trying to signpost through our service, signpost people towards also the existing things that are happening. So knowing that, we're not going to have the expertise in every area, although we do have people that are ride leaders and can do ride training, we're not going to be able to do that at scale. So we need to signpost also to the existing ones that are there. So if there are existing training resources that are relevant for Staten Island and others, we're obviously starting to make connections with a lot of the community groups and advocacy groups, but always wanting to hear of more of them.
One thing I just wanted to, actually, I realized we're kind of almost in danger of not recognizing like the even more necessary safety training, which is really for drivers and motorists. And if we bring it back to Damien's story, it had nothing to do with Damien's ability to ride a bike or not, or whether he's able to ride a bike safely, as I'm sure he is. And so many of these accidents, I know just our operations manager from Brompton had a hit and run where she broke her ankle during COVID. And I think we have to be careful, and maybe not necessarily be careful, but recognize two different channels of education, right? And as bicycling or micromobility or mobility related companies and groups, we need to sort of join together to sort of put the agenda to say, hey, it's not just about teaching cyclists how to be safe. It's like, let's have a whole segment of driver education and re-education about how to deal with more cyclists being on the road, right? It's like, if you implement a new sign that requires you to do X, Y, Z when you see it, then you're going to have to probably know that in your driver's education course. Well, the new sign is a bicycle on the road and it's someone riding, and you need to know how to deal with that. So I think that's a really good one to underscore there.
That's super key. And I'd be remiss if I didn't do a humble brag and say that our local Bike Houston, our local advocacy organization, they developed a safe drivers certification course. It was cycling oriented and whatnot, and it was very successful. But even though the organization right now is in transition, the Houston Police Department actually picked it up, and it's helping to better radiate or help it permeate the city as far as it getting to those drivers and whatnot. And again, it's a bit of a humble brag, but I definitely encourage other cities and local advocacy organizations to take steps to do the same, not just with law enforcement, but any other entity that it can be provided to. And what we did with Houston Bike Share and Houston B-Cycle was we had the drivers of our vans, we had them take that course as part of us, wanting to be a part of that effort. And again, I just think it's a really good move, and a lot of cities could definitely take note and do the same.
We've got about 4 minutes left, and I just want it, so you guys can ask questions and answers, drop them through. I'm going to grab one now and we'll see if we have time for one more. The question comes, it says, what advice do you have for community leaders on how to persuade skeptical, sometimes scared neighbors to embrace protected bike lanes, especially crosstown bike lanes?
Was that for someone in particular?
Oh, I'm just kind of waiting for someone to jump on it.
I'll do a brief bit on it. I think it reminds me of e-bikes. I was a bit of a purist and very skeptical, but I realized the benefits of an e-bike, but also it just fulfilling my purpose of introducing it to more people. I think if you help them understand the benefits and also provide data and also just genuinely engage with them, you can definitely convince them or persuade them to take on something that's very new and have a change and have a win for everyone.
I can definitely weigh in a little bit from that kind of similar perspective of relating it. I think my advice would always just be to really understand what the root of their objection is, because 9 times out of 10 it's coming from maybe some misinformation or misunderstanding or feeling of it's going to impact you in a negative way. There's usually, because bikes are great, there's usually a really simple way to kind of negate that objection and say, well, actually there's positive angle. I think a similar example is sometimes, when we've had an installation of a parklet, for example, where we're actually, that is taking up a car parking space and is often outside of businesses. Somebody can walk down the street and feel, well, you're taking up a car parking space from someone that could have parked outside of that shop and gone shopping, and that's going to cause them economic distress or whatever. There's objections like that you get all the time, and if you know your information and can turn around and say, well, actually there's a lot of evidence that the foot traffic is way higher when you have 20 bikes that can park here instead of 1 car, then you're able to kind of meet those objections. So I would always say it starts with really, really understanding where that objection is coming from, because it might just be a misunderstanding.
And we've got just 1 minute left, and actually Damien was pinging me saying he can weigh in on that. So I think what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Damien after thanking everyone here and TA. And Damien, why don't you take the last couple seconds and give us your starting thoughts on the issue.
One of the things that I found is in the work that we've been doing with the LA Department of Transportation. Let's see.
There we go. Got it.
There we go. Good. Hear me now? In our work with LA Department of Transportation, one of the things that we definitely found, which follows up on what has been said, is contacting the businesses. That is super key in terms of putting in protected bike lanes, is making sure the businesses along that route understand the benefit to their business. And if that's not done, then the backlash is a problem. And so making sure that those businesses understand the dynamics, understand the statistics of why those protected bike lanes will actually make their business thrive. And that's the biggest thing on that.
Thank you so much. And so we're at 1:15. We're going to have to close up. I'm sure we could talk for another few hours, honestly. I hope we can connect in the future. But a big thank you again to Doogie Roux, to Georgia Yexley, and to Maximilian Gawlik, and to everyone at TA, and to Damien especially, for sharing your story and all the work you've done. Please take a minute to watch the other videos that have been posted this week, and tune in for further panels. Thank you so much.